Okay, dude, we were at a party maybe like a year ago or something, and you were telling me about what it was like for you to have to get your driver's license.
Yeah.
Can you fill us in on that story?
Yeah. So at the time, I was living in Chicago. My parents just got divorced. So I was living with my dad, and my grandma was basically kind of raising me. And I had to get my license. And at this time, I was professionally go-karting. So I was traveling around the country, going to different states, racing all the time, or trying to with my dad. And my dad was like, hey, we need to get your license. Like, you need to start driving, start doing this. So in Chicago, I don't know how those states work, but basically I had to drive with the instructor 4 times, like to get signed off to get my license.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's like 50 plus hours. So it was in a Ford Escape. I think this was like test number 3, because like one was like uphill and downhill parking, and then going in a parking lot parking, and then the third one was the highway, which is the best story because I was still racing. I have no driver experience on the road, and this dude was selling something on his phone. We're really going like 65 miles an hour on the Dan Ryan. I think it was the Dan Ryan. And I'm driving. He has a brake pedal that after the story, it doesn't work. And we're all the way in the left-hand lane, so the fast lane, and then all the way is obviously the right lane, so slowing technically. And we're driving down the highway. He's texting and stuff, and we hit, and then I think we were about to miss the exit. And he was like, hey, man, I need you to get you over there right now. You need to move over. And I remember like braking, accelerating super fast. I went over 3 lanes, barely missed the off ramp. And I'm going off this ramp at like 90 miles an hour. Going off ramp, coming down the hill, I slam on the brakes. And this guy was trying to slam on his brakes. He's like, this is too fast. And we stopped. And his heart rate was through the roof. And he's like, and he's looking at me. He's like, I've never seen anyone drive like that in my life. I'm like, oh yeah. I'm like, I don't know if my dad told you, but like I race go-karts like professionally. And the guy looked at me and he was just like, this makes way more sense. But it was pretty wild. Like from 16 years old and watching a 35-year-old guy like basically freak out because I'm like taking this thing to its absolute limit. And it's an SUV, dude. Like I've never done anything like that on the highway. But I'm like, all right, I need to get over there. Just whipped the car over there, slammed on the brakes, and this dude was like, unbelievable. That's how that works, man. So that was that story. That was wild, though.
Let's go, dude. For my our friend George Mac's 30th birthday, we were out in Miami, and Chris and I did like go-kart racing.
You Williamson?
Yes, yeah,
awesome.
yeah.
Cool.
It was super fun. He ended up getting first. I got third, and then our friend Alessio got second. But that shit was absolutely nuts, dude.
Dude, go-karting is any form of racing. To me, it's super difficult. For the longest time, I think people were saying that, oh, racing's really not a sport. I mean, in Formula One, formula racing, sport car racing, guys are in there for hours at a time. It gets up to 100 plus degrees, even higher. You're losing 5 to 10 pounds, basically just water weight. You're going 160 miles an hour. That it's work. Like it is a hard job. So like when most people like they get in a car for the first time, or like today I was coaching at Coda, people are like, man, I did like 5 laps and I'm exhausted. Like it's a lot of work, but like you said, it's a lot of fun at the same time. So
for sure. How would you describe what you do? Because you have like, I feel like there's a thread of a career here, but there's so many different like realizations of it.
Yeah, I would say overall, like what I do for a living is I'm an extreme sport athlete. That's what I started off doing my whole life. I started off in go-karting at a super young age. We could talk about that. That's the whole reason why my dad put me into go-kart. And then slowly after that, I don't even know if you know this, I went to a trade school for automotive engineering. Went to school, got out of school, and basically hated my job and got into this whole skydiving realm, which that's a story in itself. And yeah, I mean, the story just keeps going on. Now I'm back into cars again. So I would say overall, I'm an extreme sport athlete. I'm constantly pushing the edge. I'm living my dreams. Eventually, I'm trying to segment out of that and go more into like an entrepreneurship and teaching more people. But yeah, I would say my job is right now currently is I'm a professional driver for a manufacturer. And then I do other extreme sports on the side. So
that's sick, dude.
That is my job.
That. That's awesome.
That's cool.
One of the things I noticed when I was doing the go-karts, and these are just for people who don't know, they go like 60 plus miles an hour in very small turns, and it's pretty intense. And I'm sure the ones you did went faster, but that's what the ones we were doing.
Sure, it's still fun.
Yeah. One of the things I kept realizing was trying to get myself to release a little bit because I'd find myself gripping the handlebars so intensely.
Sure.
And it's like, okay, I feel like I should be a little bit less tense, Like, do you have any tips for somebody who's just starting out, say they're going to go like on a bachelor party, like how to absolutely crush one of these go-kart like zones?
I think you hit a big point. I personally, I like teaching women. Women are a lot more relaxed. They're more receptive. Guys, especially teaching what I do right now, guys are, like you said, they're very tense. They're like, I hate saying it, but we have egos. We have all this stuff. We're like, oh no, I drive every single day. It's like getting in something that is fast. It's a tighter track. You actually have to learn how to do stuff is a skill in itself. So I usually tell people like, hey, if there's an instructor or someone on site, ask questions, be relaxed. Don't feel like you're super tense. If you're super tense, it's a lot harder to turn things, or you feel more like kind of like rigid. Mm-hmm. Where if you watch me drive, I'm very relaxed behind the wheel. I'm very like, hey, I'm looking to where I'm going. I'm staying relaxed behind the wheel, and I'm kind of like understanding how the track works. But usually I tell everyone, like, ask people that either work there what the lines are or like how you're supposed to drive. That's like the biggest thing, because most guys are like, oh, I'm going to get to the go-kart track. I'm going to crush it right off the bat. And then like my friends would like go off in a wall or something. Like, dude, how do you do this? It's like, ask questions first. When you get into go-kart, it kind of makes more sense. And then you can start picking up the speed as you go.
And every track will have like slightly different lines that you're supposed
to everything's different. Yeah, there's not a track that is similar. Everything's built differently. So there's like stuff that is like tighter corners that are slower a little bit, and then you have faster tracks that are longer straightaways. It's still tighter corners, but you're carrying a lot more speed for the most part. Yeah.
Is this, again, this is a generalization, but one of the things I started to realize, at least on this track, was I really wanted to be accelerating through the turns, which felt counterintuitive. Mm-hmm. Like I felt like I had more control versus if I was like braking earlier into them and then accelerating out of them, versus if I was like braking midway through the turn, then I felt like I was completely losing control.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on the track layout in itself, because like you can have a super tight corner and that could be completely different than saying like a 45-degree corner. Like, hey, you have to brake a little bit earlier. Now I can accelerate quicker now through the corner where I don't have to brake. Where tighter turns is like you're braking, you're turning into the corner, then you're accelerating, and then you're kind of coming out of that corner and start carrying that speed. So it just kind of depends on how the track layout is to kind of adjust and understand like how much braking, how much throttle, how much turning you're actually physically doing.
Yeah. So what you brought it up earlier, but why did your dad get you into go-karting?
I'm now speaking about it more. So I don't even know if you know this. So I struggled super hard in school with ADHD. I got made fun of. I was in like lower end classes. I had learning and writing disabilities where I had teachers trying to reteach me and trying to do stuff. I had to stay after school to try to relearn all this stuff. Like I had to do it like twice as hard than normal kids at school. And my dad at the time was like, he saw me struggling and he's like, hey, how can I put Colin's brain at the same speed as something else? Then my dad put me in a go-kart. When I got myself in a go-kart, I felt like everything switched on. Like it was just like everything felt normal, felt real to me, where, it made sense. Like I got in a car going super fast. I'm like, wow, to me, when I'm going, even now at 160 miles an hour, 170 miles an hour, my time slows down where it almost looks normal. It looks like kind of like normal day life. Now, when I was in school, it's just super hard. But, basically my dad saw my ADHD as a problem, put me in something that he thought was going to fix it, which it did. And that's where kind of my life took off and I felt like I could do more. And I started, moving along up through the sport industry. So,
dude, I would be extremely frustrated if you feel like your brain's moving at 10x speed or even like 5x speed, and like the teacher is like, yo, 2 plus, and you're like, fucking hey, there's so many things to be thinking about right now.
Dude, yeah, I mean that's the thing is like, my ADHD has been a battle for myself where I've had to seek out so much help in trying to get me to a specific point. And sports or extreme sports were a big part of that. Like I felt like I could do a lot more. I say this humbly, I'm super naturally gifted in a lot of stuff that I do. And every time I tried something new or a new sport, like I felt like I can do more. I can get to a professional level where I felt like normal with everybody else. Because when I went to school, I didn't feel that way. Like I felt like a complete loser. I got made fun of. And then, like I said, when I got to sports, I'm like, all right, I can do a lot more here. This is where I'm supposed to be. So I got to work really hard and be the best at what I can do here. So.
It's interesting too, because a lot of extreme sports, it feels like the thing that makes them challenging. There's 2 of these. I haven't thought about this. So this is like I'm doing this real time right now.
Yeah.
Things that make it challenging are, 1, is there's a very high speed aspect to it, whether it's skydiving or skiing or skating. Like, you have to make decisions really fast.
Yep.
Or racing, obviously.
Yep.
The second thing is there's really high risk. So you have to make quick decisions with like really high risk.
Yep.
It's like soccer, you have to make quick decisions as well, but it's a lot lower risk generally.
Yep.
You know, if you do something wrong with your parachute, like almost guaranteed death. Like, it's just the consequences are higher.
Sure.
How do you balance those two things? Like, making the right decision at fast speed. Like, do you just trust yourself?
Yeah, I think it's just a lot of just time and preparation where you put yourself in certain situations. You're like, all right, I have learned the skill for so long, you know, at a professional level, where if something does happen, I know what to do. Or I try to get myself in a situation where it's like, all right, I can call it an out. Like, I'm trying to get myself out of the situation. Mm-hmm. But yeah, you can't really, for me, I don't really freak out. It's more like it's super quick thinking. It's like, all right, what if it's a parachute, if it's something with a car, if it's, you know, surfing, name it, whatever. It's like, how do I get myself out of this situation as fast as possible, and what is the correct decision? I think it's just a quick just thinking at the moment, like, hey, I need to do this to get myself out of this, or to a point where I feel safe for the most part. So
when I was 10, I like purled on a wave, and the board like shot up backwards and sliced my leg open. And then I didn't really surf very much for like a decade because we just happened to move from Kauai like shortly after.
I did not know that.
Yeah, and it was like I had like a huge hole in my leg. It was like an hour away from any hospital.
What?
I just stared down at this hole in my leg like, Dad, am I gonna die? Like, what's going on? It was pretty like traumatic, I would say. And then when I started surfing again, I would freeze up when I was dropping in on anything steep.
Yeah.
And I had to work through that. Like, are you just someone, like, have you had bad injuries, and then how have you recovered from that? And have you like studied like meditation or working through the trauma, or have you just kind of just sent it the whole time?
Yeah, no, I definitely have had my fair share. Like, I remember one go-karting incident was pretty traumatic for me for a while. I was in Indiana at a famous track called MRP, and I was young. And I was going around this, they call it the Monza corner, but it was super fast speed, like 60, 70 miles an hour. And I think something broke, but I went off in a bag, like super quick. And that kind of shook me up for a while going around there. And
what do you mean you went off in a bag?
Like, they have like kind of like bags of like safety barriers, so you don't go off into like basically a fence.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's like a big inflatable bag to save you essentially. But I remember that was one. And I'm trying to think of another scenario that I can tell you. The other one, the skydiving story is actually good. It's when I started skydiving. I was on jump 26. This is in Skydive Chicago. And I just got my license. So I'm fresh off the gate. And it was the first jump of the day. So there's a lot that goes on the first jump of the day. Like, you need to know where the winds are, like what direction you're trying to go to. And I didn't really pay attention to any of that. I was like, hey, I just want to get in the plane and go. And that put me in a situation where I jumped out of the plane, did a bunch of fun tricks or whatever, got myself under my parachute. And when I got myself under the parachute, I remember flying it around, being like aggressive, like trying to learn it. And I didn't know what the winds were doing. And every time I was doing like an aggressive turn, I was pushing myself further and further away where I'm supposed to land. And when I got there, I was over this river, basically, and I was trying to pull myself back, and I'm like, all right, I need to get myself back to the drop zone so I can land and figure this out. So I couldn't. And from there, you talked about situations when I'm putting myself in. So I couldn't get myself back, so I had three options. I had to either land in the river, land in trees, or there was this horse farm that I can land in. So basically, I chose the horse farm that made the best decision possible for myself. So I flew over there. I turned really low where they call it swooping, but you're going super fast across the ground. And I was swooping over these bean fields. As I was coming over the bean fields, at the end of them, I couldn't see what was at the end of it, was a long barbed wire fence, and there was one wooden pole. And if it wasn't for that one wooden pole there, I hit that at probably 35 miles an hour, knocked myself unconscious completely. That shook me up for a while. Yeah. But to go to your point, like, how do I get myself out of it? I think my dad would, kind of tell me like, hey, stuff happens, pick yourself back up, get yourself in a better position. Like if you got to work through it when you're out there, I understand. I have had therapists. I have a therapist today that helps me work through a lot of stuff. So I do use helpful tools like therapy, psychology and things like that to help me. But a lot of the time I would say younger, I was just kind of working through it myself, or didn't have a choice. And I'm like, hey, if I want to get really good at this, I just got to like shut up and just kind of go through it for the whole time. So
There's one thing I've noticed in like freestyle skiing for myself is there becomes a point where the voice in my head, the stronger voice is like the risk of like fucking up is not worth the fun of doing it. And I feel like to get to your level, that voice has to be like constantly switched, or do you just override it?
I would say I override it most of the time, where it's just like, I don't think about the fucking up part. It's more of like, all right, I'm in the situation. It's like my ADHD kicks on. It's like I get in this super hyper focused like position where like everything is like, it's like a blackout for me. It's like I am so focused on what I'm doing. It's like I need to nail this, whatever sport it is. And that I'm not thinking about what the end result could be. It's like, I need to do this, and this is what I'm here for. This is what I've trained my whole life for. I'm going to give it my best. And that's what I kept doing every single time. But yes, there is times I'm like, this is going to be very difficult. Like, I hope I don't fuck this up. But then it's like, flip up a switch. Let's get going. So
when in your training, like when you were growing up, did you feel like you realized the capacity to do that? Like, what did it take to get to that level?
I don't know if it was, I always go back to my dad. I think my dad kind of like really put it on me of like at a young age of like how, my dad's a hardworking blue collar guy from Chicago, and, my dad is a great support system and stuff. So when I was going through stuff, my dad would be like, hey, brush it off. This is what we're here to do. This is what I need you to do. This is how I'm going to coach you through that. And I think over time, as I got older, there's maybe different tools and different things that I use to help me with not thinking like that, or putting myself in that mental space, or using tools like, therapy and stuff of like how do I put myself in a better position mentally when I'm trying to show up for the game? Like, that's what a lot of athletes do. They use these psychologists and stuff like, hey, how do I mentally prepare myself to get ready for the front door? So, I mean, I would say at a young age, my dad was kind of that barrier for me of like, hey, you just got to like block that out, focus on what we have. Like, we're here, like, we're here to show up and we're here to win. So I was like, okay, cool.
You told me a story one time that blew my mind, because you were in some sort of, you were competing at a very high level in skydiving. I forget what the exact competition was, but something happened to where you were like super concussed.
Yeah.
And you still like persevered to like show up for it, which always blew my mind, because I'd be like, fuck that. So like, can you tell us the story, and then let's dive deep into that?
Yeah. So this was indoor skydiving, and this I think was, I want to say it was 2017. Yeah, 2017. So at this time, me and my teammate Cameron were one of the best U.S. teams for indoor skydiving two-way. I would say in the U.S. we were the best. We won nationals. We were at top of the game. We were training unbelievably crazy. I could talk about that all day. We won nationals, and then it was basically a 7th month of training of getting ready for the World Championships. And we were training like crazy. I mean, to give you an idea, I don't even think you know this, there was a point in my life I was probably flying in an indoor skydiving more than I was walking.
Whoa.
Yeah, like it was 5 a.m. We're training. I would work all day, and then late at night, no matter what time, me and Cameron were back in the wind tunnel training because we wanted to win. That was the goal. I wanted to get to that point. I was at what I wanted to do in indoor skydiving, and then 7 months later, where the accident you talked about happened, we were training, and we're flying at 100% of speed in the wind tunnel, which is nearly probably about 190, 200 miles an hour speed-wise.
Oh, shit.
Yeah, that's the wind going. And we're moving super fast. And this is kind of hard to explain, but basically I did a move wrong. And because we were moving so fast, because we were trying to cut our time down for this specific part of it, that when I turned a wrong way, I hit my head on the back of the glass super fast, and it cracked my whole helmet. And I was still like finishing out what I was doing, and that kind of threw me off completely, where I didn't at the time knew I had a concussion. And then I got to my house, I think I drove home and I was fogging. I think we stopped and I got home and I was in my kitchen and I'm like, man, I don't feel good. And I blacked out, passed out on my kitchen floor.
Oh, shit.
And then went to a hospital, got my head scanned. And then I remember this doctor came out and he's just like, Colin, he's like, dude, you have a massive concussion in your head. And I was just like, what does that mean? Like, I'm about to leave for one of the biggest moments of my life in about a week. And he was like, well, he's like, I don't recommend you flying for the next like 6 months. Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, if you didn't have an option and if there was a lot on the line and people were, holding you to this point, what would you do? And he looked at me and he was like, take 4 days off, sleep, eat carbs, just get yourself like mentally in a good place. And he's like, try again in the next couple of days and see how you feel. I did what he said. I slept for 4 days. I came back to work and training. I did not feel great. And this is where like you said, like, how do you push through that mental limit? And I had a lot on my table and a lot of stress. And I remember flying and I was super dizzy and we're flying super fast. And I'm like, this sucks, man. Like, I've trained so hard to get to this point. Like, what do I do? And my dad calls me and he sits on the phone. He's like, how do you feel, man? I was like, I could be better. He's like, do you think you can make it to Montreal for the World Championships? And I'm like, you know what? I've trained hard enough to get to this point. I'm going to do what I have to do. We're going. And I remember we went to Canada. I was training for a week straight at a different wind tunnel, not the World Championship place. And dude, I was throwing up. I was. It was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do in my life. But it was the most rewarding at the end where I didn't fly anything for after 6 months after that. But dude, it was wild. It was the most pain. And definitely one of the hardest things I've ever had to do is being a professional athlete. Mm-hmm. Is like, I have to really, it's probably not the best, but I pushed through it to, I wanted to be the best. Mm-hmm. And that specific thing and to do that in that sport meant a lot to me. So pushing through that was definitely difficult.
Do you think that it was worth it?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think, yeah. I think now that if I think about it now, I mean, in indoor skydiving, getting in the world of skydiving in general, I wanted to be a professional athlete. Being a professional athlete to me, and no matter what capacity, it was a dream of mine. It's what I wanted to do. I've always wanted that. And to do it at a completely different sport that I just completely continuously excelling, figuring it out, and being in that position where I was getting, paid, sponsors, I was living a legit dream. And to get to the World Championship stage and know that we were like a top 3, top 5 team and knew that we could win it, I wasn't like going to give that up. I was like, it's time to win. My teammate had a kid on the way and that was like, why he wanted to win as well. And I think with both of our minds, it was just like, we got to do this. And that's something I will never regret for sure.
Fuck yeah. Dude, I'm getting chills. Wait, what was the outcome?
Unfortunately, we didn't top in the top 5. I think my teammate at the time, like, he messed up on something. It was kind of traumatic for the both of us, but we had the best freestyle routine, I would say, in that entire World Championship. And that, like, the free routine of what we did was such a big thing for us. And it was so, like, they call it like very American, but it looked like Blades of Glory, just on a way cooler level. Yeah, that's the best description I could put it.
That's awesome.
But no, I mean, we did good in other competitions. We went to Spain and stuff, but like, we knew we were a top 5 team. Mm-hmm. And I think having a teammate, and this is something that I will take for the rest of my life, having someone that is just as committed as you and is willing to really go through the blood, sweat, and tears, where you hear that all the time, really does make a difference. And that kid wanted to win, and he'll do whatever it took. And I think having that support and having him grind with me through a lot of crazy stuff to that point is something that I was like, all right, I might be hurt right now, but we're going to do it. We're going to try to make it the best team possible out here. So, yeah, man.
I feel like also the fact that you had every reason in the world to back out, could have had a doctor's note, or vomiting in itself is gross, especially if there's a 190 mile per hour winds that you're vomiting into.
It's wild. Yeah. I don't know why. Sometimes I'm like, man, that is like, sometimes I don't think about it as much anymore, but it's just like, I would say certain things that I have done in my life has prepared me in a way now where it's just like, yeah, I probably wouldn't do that, but also it's like, if I want something, I know me as a person, if I want it really bad, I will give it 150% of my effort and I will try to be the best at it. That is just who I am as a person. And I'm like, that's what I wanted. So like, I know that now if that's, you know, going into starting a business or eventually becoming a dad or, you know, anything like that, I think that is super important to take along with you in your whole life. And yeah, it's crazy to think for sure.
Yeah, man. And I love that. And that's why one of the reasons I want to talk to you and why some people might be a little bit confused this far in based on my usual people I talk to is because to me, that's what it means to create art. And like, I don't have a very limited view of art. Like, I'm not thinking like painting, right? To me, art is the thing that you experience when you're at the edge of your limit, when, you know, are like you are pushing yourself to a place that like no animal would push themselves, that's past what you think is possible, and what you can create like in those moments that give meaning to your life. Yeah. You know, that are moments you can look back and be like, that was worth it, even though it was hard, or even though it didn't turn out as how I wanted it to, but I pushed myself. Like, I pushed my creativity. I pushed my energy into a place that, you know, I will never doubt myself from. And it's funny because it's the place where I typically do this thing where it's this dichotomy between art and propaganda. I've kind of created this like semi like yin yang with it. And for me, the propaganda comes in when you're just phoning it in, or there's like a different incentive model. It's not like I'm out here fulfilling my dream. I'm living like full on, like dropping into something and feeling insanely alive. It's like I'm just phoning it in.
That's wild. Do you, with your art and me understanding this, is that apply like with what that is to like, you know, I know you're a mega big surfer, which I am too. I love surfing. Do you apply that to surfing, that same analogy, like pushing the limits or like finding that? Because I remember we talked a while ago and you're like, hey, if I remember this correctly, we were like, oh, I want to surf big waves out in
Piahe.
Yeah.
In Jaws. Yeah.
Jaws.
Yeah.
And like, do you apply that to the same with that basically? Like, how do you take that moving forward?
Yeah. So the way that I would consider my art to be podcasting / business.
Yeah.
And to me, that is like, this is where I'm trying to really push myself and to continuously get better and to continuously experiment and to be very present and to feel a flow state with the person I'm working from and to like really enjoy it and to push boundaries and to do things that scare me. But the surfing thing, like that, I think just applies. Like, I'm a huge Musashi fan. I don't know if you're familiar with Miyamoto Musashi.
I think so. Yeah.
He was like the greatest Japanese swordsman of all time.
Okay.
But he has a bunch of amazing quotes, but one of them is know the world broadly to like know your craft specifically. So like he would study the mountains to learn sword fighting. He would study calligraphy to learn sword fighting. And it's kind of like the way in which you push yourself in life is the thing that will hone you to push deeply into the art. And that's where I think about it. Because surfing, you know, I restarted surfing again. That helped me get married, you know, because I was at a place where my dad had me at 48 years old. Marriage was never a priority to me. But my wife, who was the same age as me, Caroline, who you know, she says hello, by the way. Yeah. You know, she knew she wanted to have a family, knew she wanted to have kids, and knew she wanted to move forward. I knew I wanted to too, but we're the same age. My parents are 15 years apart, so different timeline. And I was just kind of like in this stuck period, and I was also kind of stuck in my ability to surf as well. And it was like this thing of like, oh fuck, like I keep putting myself in dangerous situations and then freezing because of like this past experience, and I need to actually commit. And by committing and like dropping in and like really pushing myself over that little water cliff, like I have actually more control and more agency in my life. Not only is it more fun, but I actually have the ability to do things now. I'm not just in this weird standstill that I didn't realize I was in. So that massively impacted me for sure.
That's wild.
Yeah.
That's so cool. I truly love listening to other people in like, you know, surfing or other extreme sports and like how they deal with stuff, or like you said, like your parents are different apart, you know, how they got married and stuff. Like that's amazing. Like that's super cool. Like you should be proud of that, and a very, you know, large portion of it. It's wild, man. That is so cool.
For sure, dude. And like one of the reasons I love more extreme sports, or at least sports that have to do with nature, and to me surfing is the ultimate for me personally, is just because there's so many variables, whereas like so much of, I feel like the internet and a lot of life right now is like constraining variables, focusing on this one thing. But like surfing, I think you have such an ability to learn. Like it's like, to use like a woo term, like it's the best medicine, like it's the best teacher, because it's like you have to get over ego. You have to realize to take the opportunity as soon as it comes, because you never know when the next one's going, to really fucking send it, to put yourself in a good position quickly, to give it your all in like a very short amount of time, and then to like also when you get into the actual point where you're like just in awe, like you're feeling awe. And I think awe is something that as an artist I'm chasing like massively.
Yeah. That's wild. I think everyone's kind of chasing that awe factor.